The Triad region remains one of North Carolina's most attractive housing markets, offering a perfect blend of affordability, quality of life, and economic opportunity. As you consider purchasing a home in 2025, the Sharp Mortgage Team is ready to help. With median home prices significantly lower than the national average, first-time homebuyers and families continue to find excellent value in the Triad. And with programs like NC Housing Financing Down Payment Assistance, your new home may be more affordable than you think. Or if your holiday bills have been stacking up, the Sharp Mortgage Team can help you consolidate your debts and put you on a successful road in 2025. Call them today and they'll advise you on the best strategy. Call Ashley and the folks at the Sharp Mortgage Team at 336-575-9448 today for a no-obligation conversation that could be your best decision all year.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.
Happy New Year, everyone. And if your resolutions include something along the lines of money or finances, then this is the podcast for you to start off 2025. No pressure there, Jennifer. Jennifer Johnson is our certified financial planner. She is with Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. They are here in Winston-Salem, right in the heart of the Triad. All her information is in the show notes, and we'll let her let you know all the different ways that you can reach her at the end of the episode. So, Jennifer, this is the time of year when everyone talks about resolutions and fresh starts and all different things that they want to do to be a different person, or maybe just a slightly improved version of themselves as they start a new year. And we wanted to go ahead and get this started right at the front of the new year. We're recording this on the morning of New Year's Day. We are both taking our holidays to make sure that we get the right information out to the listeners because, as it appears, Jennifer, finances are right at the top of the list when it comes to things people want to be better at in the new year.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I think it consistently is maybe number one or two, I guess, depending upon what list you look at that has something to do with finances. If it's saving more money or, just stop spending money on things you don't need or things like that, create a budget. Those are always at the top of the list on lists I see. And I think that's true today too. Obviously, it's the first day of the year, so this is hot off the presses. We're looking at a few different lists too, which I thought was kind of interesting to see what's out there today. That I could share a few of those too.
Yeah,
if you're open. Yeah, I mean, I see. Of course, I see save more money at the top of the list here for this is from the Austin American Statesman, which I thought was interesting. But I happened upon a couple of others that I thought was very interesting, like from the Pioneer Woman, who's a sort of a celebrity chef. If folks know who that is, I know who that is, but I don't know if. Do you know who that is, Adam?
I don't follow her very much, but I've certainly heard the name before. Or the moniker.
Yeah. It looks like she's posted the 60 best New Year's resolutions to take on in 2025 on her website, which I think is interesting. And the top one is read or listen more, which I thought was interesting. There's several that I noticed that had to do with reading a book a month or something like that. Now, number two is to create a budget. So I thought that was interesting there too. It's not the top one, but it's right up there.
Which one do you tend to see more often? Is it saving money or is it creating a budget? And maybe those go hand in hand, but which one does it seem to gravitate toward more?
Yeah, I typically see save more money, or save money or some version of that. But of course, those two are linked, right? Because somebody that's making that resolution is probably not saving money, in the past years. And how do you do that? As we've discussed them before on different topics, I think you've got to start by examining what you're spending money on now, where's that money going? So you don't, so you have some money to save. I thought that was interesting. I did notice this is from NPR, actually. Was just posted earlier this morning. And they had a couple at the top that I thought was very interesting for 2025. Number one was stay out of debt,
Hmm.
um, which I'm not sure if that means, pay off debt, which I think is another common one, right? Like to
Yep.
pay off debt, to not add to their debt, maybe. And then I guess this was number two. It says, which I thought was kind of funny, stop spending money when I'm stressed. I feel like those two might be linked,
Yeah.
for whoever answered that survey.
Yeah.
Where people, get stressed out and I
Yeah.
forget, what do you call it? So retail therapy or something like that,
Uh-huh.
where
Yep.
people go and buy something because they're
Yeah.
stressed out.
Now it's more like Amazon therapy.
Yeah, you don't even
Yeah.
have to leave the house,
No,
right? Like, which
no.
is dangerous, as we said before. I've seen a lot of commercials. I don't know if you have, about subscriptions and how to cancel subscriptions
Yep.
and how to identify. Apparently, people are paying for two Netflixes and things like that sometimes. I don't
Yeah.
even know how you do that, but I guess that's a common thing probably too.
Yeah. So when it comes to debt, which do you think is, if you had to choose one to put first? I don't want to say you choose one
Hmm.
and not the other, but if you had to
Yeah.
figure out which one to do first. So let's say it's when you say tackling debt and we're wondering
Yeah.
which way to go with that, do
Sure.
you say, well, I want to start by paying off my debt, or is it just make sure you don't accumulate any more debt. Don't
Yeah.
use your credit cards. Don't
Right.
go out and buy a new car and finance it and take on
Yep.
new debt with that. Which one do you think should be?
Yeah, when I'm talking to folks about that, because that's not uncommon. People come in and that's one of their goals. They're kind of struggling with debt, and you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's not people of low income necessarily, which you could sort of understand, particularly with the inflation we've had, how people, of lesser income could end up in a debt situation. A lot of times it's people with higher incomes, right? Because it felt like you were making all kinds of money, maybe. And so it didn't
Yep.
feel like it should be a problem. And then you turn around, you've got a credit card bill you can't pay. And so a lot of times the first thing I'll tell them is, okay, we've got to, number one, let's stop adding to the problem, right? Let's, stop using cards. Let's certainly don't buy anything else big, like you mentioned, a car, until we deal with this.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of step one, is to stop accumulating it. So, maybe this, whoever the folks answering that NPR survey, maybe they could reverse that, and stop spending money when I'm stressed first,
Yeah.
which will help them stay out of probably more debt.
Sure.
But I just thought that was an interesting, answer, or top two answers, maybe some of the more interesting ones I've seen.
Yeah. I guess if you think of debt as a leaky boat, you got to fix the leak before you
Yeah.
start dumping water back out of the boat. So if you just
Yeah.
fill up buckets and dump water off the side, it's not gonna go down because
That's
you
right.
gotta fix the leak, and the leak, and what we're talking about is using that credit card.
Yeah, and I think the credit cards are probably the most dangerous for that, because obviously if you buy a car, like, that's a big decision, and there's a lot of paperwork and all sorts of things, typically involved in that. But the credit card, it's just so easy, just to, even though if you say, well, I'm going to pay X dollars a month toward it, maybe it's an aggressive amount, which is great. But if you keep using it and the same spending habits, you may just be treading water, to use the same water analogy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of these articles that we're talking about, and we'll post the links to
Sure.
them in the show notes. But we seem to tackle something similar to this in each of our January episodes.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
number one, according to these polls that we're talking about, number one goal in 2025 seems to be saving money or
Yeah,
something around the area of finances.
right.
Um, but according to an article that we'll link from ABC News, nearly what 80% of people lose track of their goals in
Yeah,
mid-February. So we're
right.
gonna, I guess what we're gonna
Right.
talk about is how do you set these financial goals so that you don't become part of that 80%?
Yeah, right, right. And I think that's the same whether whether it's finances or something else, right? I mean, there's obviously health and other things that people work on. And you could probably apply these same principles to whatever your goals are. And it looks like nearly half the people are making some kind of resolution. So hopefully folks that are listening to this would be helpful for them. Number one, I think, and there was some good information in an article from Daytimer, which I don't know if a lot of folks that are listening may not remember Daytimer, but before we did everything electronically, Daytimer was like a book you carried around, which kept like your calendar and phone
Hmm.
numbers
Oh yeah.
before, phones and stuff like that. It was like your organizer. And so they were sort of a source for, keeping your world, organized and
Hmm.
keeping you on time for stuff. And I just thought that was interesting that they were still out there, kind of with some information. Now it's online, ironically, instead of in a book. But
Hmm.
the first thing they mentioned, which I agree with, is start small. All right. And we just sort of talked about that with debt a little bit, right? With don't set, five different goals. Don't say to yourself, well, I'm gonna pay down the debt, and I'm gonna start my retirement savings at 10% if you haven't been doing that. And I'm gonna I'm gonna start the kids' college funds. Like, it's too much, right? Like, if you haven't been doing any of that, I mean, if you're doing all that, you can obviously, maybe your goal is to do a little bit better in all those areas, which is wonderful. But for a lot of people, though, they are struggling, with debt. They're struggling. They don't have an emergency fund, which we've talked about before. They're not saving for retirement in an adequate way, and maybe have nothing for their children's college. So, if that's you, I would just say start small.
Hmm.
Maybe, the debt a lot of times, as we started off with, which I think is a good place to start. A lot of times, destructive debt and destructive spending habits that probably led to that debt are the number one thing that is preventing you, from doing all those other things we just talked about. And so, I would say one, maybe in addition to what this article pointed out with starting small, is make the right priorities. If you are struggling with, a budget, you're kind of going backward, you're spending more than you make each month. I don't think it makes sense to start retirement savings, for example.
Yeah.
Right. I think it makes sense to tackle the problem, as painful as that might be, but start with kind of a one focus, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because everyone has these big ideas and they want to have these major transformations, but
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
difficult, especially if you're, if you're a fully formed adult,
Hmm.
making wholesale changes to your life. It becomes very, very complicated and just
Hmm.
not realistic to keep up. I think before we've used the comparison of, if your resolution is to go to the gym, don't say I'm going to go to the gym every day. Like,
Right.
that's just not reasonable. Say
Right.
I'm going to make a
Right.
goal of going to the gym twice a week. You know,
Right.
Eh,
Right.
make it take a step forward for sure, but don't make it this huge leap that's going to be really, really difficult to maintain.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think it's somewhat related to start small. The next thing they mention in this daytime article is to make it reasonable, right? And I
Yeah.
think that
Yep.
you're pointing to exactly that, which is probably one reason people get disappointed. They set that like really unrealistic, goal. And then if they go five times one week and then they just get really discouraged, when in reality, that's a huge leap forward, right? In that example,
Hmm.
is to, start with a focus and then set a reasonable goal. Like, if, back to our debt example, if you have, significant credit card debt, and I've helped people kind of run these numbers before, you're not going to pay that off in 6 months, most likely, right? So, like, don't go into it being like, well, I'm gonna pay this off in such a radically short period of time. Recognize it's probably going to be a long-term thing. And, like, probably maybe one way to think about this too is to make it, sustainable. Like, don't make it
Right.
something you can't stick with, because that's where I think that's probably where most people are kind of going wrong. It's like an unrealistic expectation.
I want to take a quick break from this show to do two things. One, we'll say thank you for listening and supporting the Triad Podcast Network. Just listening to this episode is appreciated. Second, I want to ask that you support a local business that supports us as a presenting partner, a real estate company we trust, the Ginther Group, located in Winston-Salem. The housing market is moving fast. You need someone you can rely on to assess your situation, read the data and trends, and steer you in the right direction. Interest rates, inventory, new construction, there are so many factors that impact our local market. Don't buy into the national internet headlines. Get the information from the folks right here in our neighborhood. Contact Blake Ginther and the Ginther Group today. Whether you're buying or selling, have cash or not, or if your home isn't in the ideal condition for selling, chances are they have a solution for you. Call 336-283-8689 or visit theginthergroup.com. Buying, selling, investing, or just learning, whatever you need. Start now and, like me, you can become a Ginther Group client for life. If you go into 2025, let's say you have $5,000 of credit card debt, right?
Yeah.
And you say, I'm going to be debt free in 2025. And
right.
you happen to have $5,000 in a bank account and you pay off the entire thing. Well, now you've torpedoed your emergency funds, right?
Right. Because the second your car breaks down, you don't have anybody, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's like, just like you said, be reasonable about it and say, okay, I've got $5,000 of credit card debt. By the end of the year, I want it to be half, or I want it to be gone. But don't do it to where you have to pay like $700 toward debt every month, and it hurts your ability to save. Just make sure that I guess at the very least, right, make sure you're paying more than what the interest would be.
Yeah, that's right. Or else you won't make any progress. Right. And I think it's going to vary so much by the person, where like if you have, for some people, like they could make a few changes and free up $700, and then for other people, like that's a radical life change. That's just may not be feasible. You may have to do in smaller chunks. Certainly I would say like start with a plan, right? Like, and that's of course what we talk about a lot. In my, mantra, if you will, as a financial planner is I think if you don't tackle it at all, if you don't have a plan, like the likelihood of you actually achieving it becomes slim to none. It almost becomes like a random possibility. Maybe you achieve it, but most people don't without a realistic plan. And one that they can work.
What's a good way to make sure that you're keeping up with whatever that goal is? If it's a small goal and it's a reasonable goal, how do you make sure that you're keeping up with it?
Yeah, we've seen this consistently, not just with New Year's resolutions, but with kind of goals in general, is if you write it down, your likelihood of actually achieving it goes up dramatically, which I always thought was very interesting. So I think for one, you start with writing it down. Like, don't just say out loud, I want to create a budget, but you write yourself a note. I will create a budget, right? And I think the other thing to think about, it's not covered here necessarily, but most people, I could be wrong in this, but at least a lot of people are in some sort of relationship, right? So, if it's a family, I think you've got to get some buy-in from other folks in the family, right? If you're a single person, then obviously it's just you. And so it may be the idea of finding like some sort of accountability partner, or, I think certainly that's where an advisor or financial planner, can kind of be helpful in getting that. When you meet with an advisor, you're generally like formulating your goals. We're going to kind of hash those out and really quantify those. And that really helps start people down a journey, even if you don't, your forward life doesn't match that exactly, helps push you toward that. But I think that's a big part of it, is sort of having a, I don't know if accountability partner is the right word, but, hashing them out with someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough because money is something that we're not very transparent about
Yeah,
unless it's with an immediate family member or spouse.
right.
It's not like the gym. It's not like a diet. You know,
Yeah,
we're not transparent about how much money we are bringing in, how much money we're
yeah,
spending, what our budget
right.
looks like. You know, we're very vague about those things, and so yeah, whether it's a financial planner or if it's just somebody that you just need to be transparent with, it always
Mm-hmm.
helps to
Mm-hmm.
have a a support system there to make sure that you're staying on track.
Yep, I think so. I mean, and I know I've heard of people doing some crazy things with friends, like if they're not, in a relationship, if they, like for example, if they don't get up and go to the gym, like they'll have a partner where they'll text each other, and if they don't respond, like they'll
Yep.
have to do something horrible,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
if they don't get up. So I guess that's one way. I mean, I think you're right. People don't typically share their personal finances very much. It's so personal that
Hmm.
people often don't do that, and it can be embarrassing, to people too
Right.
sometimes. I think unfortunately that prevents them from seeking like professional help too. Like I know a lot of times people will, you can tell when they first meet they're sort of embarrassed. And ironically, it's usually the people that don't need to be that come in feeling bad, and then other folks you're just like, wow, this is really serious.
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
don't seem to be taking it as seriously as you do. But I would just encourage people to say, hey, you certainly are not alone, and you don't want to let that embarrassment keep you from sort of formalizing, like, because I think a lot of times, you don't, once you write it down, it kind of becomes real, I think,
Yep.
for one.
Hmm.
And you've made that commitment. So, I think that's really a great way to do it. And then if I think ideally you want it something quantifiable, right? Like um in that example of read a book a month, obviously you can track your progress of reading a book a month if it's, to pay down so much in debt, or create a budget and stick to it. That's something you need to be looking at. I think ideally maybe on a monthly basis, like a quick look. And I always tell people, you really need to try to find like a way to make it easy on yourself.
Yeah.
If it's using some sort of technology or, a spreadsheet or whatever you do, like you don't want to make it this arduous thing, because like you're not going to stick with it if it takes you hours and hours, right, to
Correct.
do.
Correct.
So that's one thing I always stress to people, like there's no right or wrong way to do it, but finding an easy way is, to see how you're doing. And it, it may be that you need somebody else to kind of help you with that, right? Like it may be somebody to say, an advisor or someone to, if the goal is to create an emergency fund or start funding your Roth IRA or something like that. I think, working with someone just creates that ability to have somebody else there to keep you on track.
Yeah. I find that if my resolutions go astray, it's because like let's say it's read a book a month.
Yeah.
If I get to the end of the month and I haven't completed a book, sometimes I
Yeah.
might tend to say, well, didn't reach my goal.
That's done.
Might
Yeah.
as well just throw it away now. I mean,
Right.
I feel like I don't know,
Right.
maybe that's not the way to approach it.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because maybe you read half a book, right? And you wouldn't have read half a book before if you hadn't set that goal, because, maybe that's just not, you haven't been reading. Um, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that we will, things aren't going to go exactly as planned,
Right.
right? And I tell people that all the time. I mean, and I would say that's why you need an ongoing relationship with your advisors, because for better or worse, somebody couldn't walk into the office today and me map out the rest of their life, their
Right.
financial life, and expect nothing to change, right? You
Yep.
just can't do that. And there may be times in your life where you have competing goals that you can't fully do all simultaneously, right? So, I have that conversation with especially young families a lot, where they're just like, how much can you really do toward college if you also want to make sure you're on track for retirement, or you want to do something to the house or whatever? I mean, and then a lot of times it's a, it's a sort of a a sort of prioritization, and seeing what makes the most sense for the family. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do any of it, right?
Right.
Like, I mean,
Right.
I think a lot of times people are like, well, if I should, this is impossible. I just can't do it. And they get discouraged. And so they just kind of slip back into maybe some bad habits or don't do anything. And I think just remind yourself, even if if you set that goal, like you were using that example, to pay off $5,000 in debt by the end of the year, and you get into February and you really haven't made any progress because you realize, oh my gosh, now I've spent all this money on Christmas, right? And instead of having $5,000 in debt, it's 6,000.
Mm.
Um, just kind of reevaluate, right? And realize, hey, this is going to be a long-term thing, and just commit to it. And know, like, if you go into it, I think knowing things aren't, you're making a plan, but things aren't gonna go exactly like you plan. That's why you revisit them. I think that hopefully helps keep people motivated too, and not fall apart. Because, like, maybe you read two books the next month, right?
Yeah.
You finish that book and you read two more, like it's the kind
Yeah.
of thing, you just kind of, like you said, you set a goal, you track it, and if at the end of the year you've read 10 books instead of 12, that's 10 books you wouldn't have read probably otherwise.
Exactly.
Life is full of celebrations, birthdays, holidays, life milestones, and so much more. And who has been helping generations of families celebrate these events? Our friends at Dewey's Bakery. And even if you aren't planning for something in the near future, you don't have to wait to enjoy something savory and delicious from Dewey's. Maybe you just need something to get you through your Mondays. Drop by every Monday for a free Cake Square Day. No purchase necessary. Just come celebrate the start of a new week. So, if you're hearing this ad on a Monday and you're in your car, reset that GPS and get to one of their 3 Triad locations immediately in Winston-Salem at Thruway and Renolda Manor, plus one in Greensboro at Friendly Shopping Center. And any day of the week, you can find the perfect item with fast and easy ordering options at local.deweys.com. Plus, Dewey's does so much to help celebrate our community. To date, they've given back over $4 million to local schools, churches, and other nonprofits. Your next celebration isn't complete without something special from Dewey's Bakery. Dewey's. Celebrate every day.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, was if you slip up a month, I mean, and you end up, let's say
Hmm.
you read, like your example of 10, or even if it's six
Yeah.
books, if you only
Yeah.
end up reading a book every 2 months, that's still 6 books you didn't read before. So that's
Yeah.
still progress. That's still good.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think so. Hopefully people take something
Yeah.
positive from
Yeah.
that. And I think it's also I just think it's so important to, like, kind of talk about these, especially the financial goals. If it's to read a book, you probably don't have to engage your partner too much in that. But I think with financial goals, because I see that sometimes where, like, you've got a couple and one is, maybe more concerned about the saving and the spending, and the other is a little less concerned. And so
Right.
that person, starts out January with, like, we're going to pay off this debt. Like, we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to put aside all the savings. And if the other partner is not on board with that, that can cause a lot of stress. Or the other partner's like, hey, that's not,
Yep.
maybe they're just the voice of reason, not like they're a crazy spender, but they're like, oh, remember, we have to pay the kids tuition or whatever, that kind of thing. And they have to kind of be that voice in the relationship. I think that can create a lot of
Hmm.
relationship stress there. So as people are thinking about these goals and writing goals down and figuring out how they're going to track goals and stay positive, I would say make sure, if you're a family unit, that's going to affect the whole family. And maybe have some conversations with everybody in the household before you get
Yeah.
too deep.
Yeah. And I guess the last one that I would say, that this isn't mentioned in the article, but I think we've kind
Hmm.
of danced around this throughout this conversation, is be specific about your goals.
Yeah.
Don't say, well, my goal is to save money. Well, my goal is to
Right.
read more. My goal is to, you know, be specific about what your goals are.
Right.
If you're
Right.
trying to save money, you'll say, okay, my goal is to put away $100
Yeah.
every month. My goal is to
Yeah.
read a book a month.
Right.
Be
Right.
something you can track. You can't track. Well, my goal is to be on a diet. Well, you can't really
Yeah, that's
track
a
that
tough one.
unless you're,
Yeah.
unless you actually write down what those specifics are
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
So again,
Yeah,
I
I
think we've
agree.
danced around that more, but it's really hard to accomplish something that doesn't really have a value to it.
Yeah, I agree. And at least with financial goals, I think that's pretty easy to quantify usually,
Right.
right? I think it's interesting. Like some of those I saw were like, cultivate mindfulness. Well, I'm not sure how you would quantify that or track that. I mean, I'm sure there's a way. But that one's going to be a tough one. Like, I'm glad I don't have to help somebody.
Yeah.
Selfishly, I'm glad I don't have to help somebody with that. Or like one was like have a healthier relationship with caffeine. I'm sure you could quantify that. I totally know what they mean, by the way. Like I
Yeah.
understand it's not a resolution of mine for 2025, but some of these are like harder. I just thought they're it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. It was like a fun little exercise for me to see what people are, people are, is it resoluting? I'm not sure if I'm saying that word right, but like what people are shooting for in 2025
That's funny. A healthier relationship with
with
caffeine.
caffeine.
Ca-
Yeah.
Caffeine
Yeah.
stops smothering me.
Right. Right. Yeah. Somebody's got an addiction, which I understand that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny.
Okay.
So hopefully folks, I hope you guys will all create some
Yeah.
reasonable, quantifiable, goals for the new year. And if it's
Yeah.
anything in finance, I'm happy to help
Well,
with that.
as we've talked about, it can be difficult to find somebody that can help you stay on track because it's difficult to
Yeah,
find someone with which you can be transparent about your
right.
finances. So, if you need an ally
Yeah.
and someone to talk to about it, Jennifer is someone that my family and I talk to about ours. And so, if folks want to talk to you, Jennifer, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can, we're local, so you can give us a call even. We're 336-701-1600 is our phone number. You can shoot me an email. My email is Jennifer at the number 3 hyphen magnolias with an s.com. Check us out online. Our website is our company name all spelled out, is 3magnoliasfinancialadvisors.com. And we'll of course post this on the website and try to put some other things on there that might be helpful for folks to get their financial house in order in 2025.
Yeah. And also on her website, you can find archives of our podcast.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
tackle a lot of different topics. So if saving money or budgeting or
Yeah.
finding ways to increase your income, all different things related to your financial situation, investing basics, things that happen if there's
Mhm.
major news that happens, we discuss the impacts of that. And so, yeah, that website is a place where you can find all of our episodes where we dive into all things that can hopefully give you some ideas and some best practices related to your finances. So, Jennifer, happy New Year to you, and
Yeah.
good luck with whatever your resolutions are for this year.
Yeah, same to you. Same to you. Y'all have a good one.
Securities offered through Private Client Services, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through 3 Magnolias Financial Advisors, located at 110 Oakwood Drive, Suite 480, Winston-Salem, North Carolina 27103. 3 Magnolias Financial Advisors and Private Client Services are not affiliated. Private Client Services is under separate ownership from any other named entity. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. All economic and performance information is historical and not indicative of future results. The market indices discussed are unmanaged. Additional risks are associated with international investing, such as currency fluctuations, political and economic stability, and differences in accounting standards. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only, and not necessarily those of Private Client Services. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Private Client Services nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.